security. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive in. So first of all, what is Log4j? So for those of you who aren't maybe developers or who don't live in the world of Apache and open source, Log4j is number 252. And so, okay, well, that's not that high, but out of 7.1 million total downloaded components on Apache. So Apache, an open source platform, and the Log4j component is, one of the very top, most popular components that's downloaded. So what does it do? It is essentially the logging component of the Apache framework. So it logs events that are happening in that software and then communicates that log and that message to the user or to others in the organization. One of the more frequent examples you may see is when you're on the web and you type a web address that doesn't return an answer, you'll get the 404 error around a bad web link. So think of this as the way software companies are allowing a logging of their application. And then it's embedded in that software. So it's an open source component that you can download and you can embed in your software. And it allows the programmer to specify custom code. So in other words, that 404 message, right? So when this happens, a log is created. That log can then be sent someplace else for further, essentially, analysis or processing that then returns a message. So it could be, in this case, the 404, it could come back with looking up a name. So you type in your a name on your login name, and then it links to your actual name, as an example. And it uses a thing called JNDI, or Java Naming and Directory Interface, to conduct this communication, right? So when that log happens, that JNDI will essentially allow this communication to go out to that other server and bring back another piece of information so that you, as the user or the analyst or whatever, can get more context to what's going on in that log message. And that uses a range of different protocols to do that. One thing that people may have heard of is this term of a jar file. And a lot of the ways that people have thought about trying to find the Log4j files that are hidden, as it were, embedded in the software program, is to look up these quote unquote jar files, which are Java archives, which essentially is, it's based on the zip format. You could think of it as basically a zip file where you're storing all of your Java components. And theoretically, if you find the jar file and you delete that, you can then, you will have addressed the vulnerability by getting rid of Log4j. The problem is you've also deleted everything else around Java in that jar file. So the basic concept here is it is a logging framework. But the unique part about this is this logging framework allows for communication outside the application itself to other applications or other servers. That's the benefit of it, but also became a bit the risk. So Log4shell. Log4shell is the name of the vulnerability, actually multiple vulnerabilities that were discovered within the Log4j product or component. As Jen Easterly calls it, who's the director of the US CISA, the most serious vulnerability she's seen in her lifetime. This is a really big deal. And the reason it is a big deal is because it is spread across so many devices. So number one, there's actually multiple vulnerabilities here. The most significant and the original one was one that enabled remote code execution. It was actually discovered in China by someone at Alibaba who discovered this risk. And that has a CVE score of 10. The other ones are in the 9s. And the affected versions you see here, obviously we'll send this report out. You've probably already figured out what affected versions are if you've been diving into this whole Log4j question. Just give you a sense of how widespread this is. The vulnerable versions of this software are in 8% of all Java packages. You can think of the number of Java packages that are out there. Just to give you a sense, a median for other vulnerabilities is 0.1%. So when you think of other Java vulnerabilities, they apply to 0.1% on average or in median of Java packages. This applies to 8% of them. It is very widespread. And basically, the vulnerability, if it's an affected version, they have certain features that allow an adversary to basically substitute this message, as I mentioned, that communicates outbound and then comes back in. They can basically substitute messages in that lookup, and on that return path, send pretty much anything they want into that application. And so they can create what's called a reverse shell that allows a remote server to control the device. So what does that look like? So the Swiss CERT came out with a pretty good graphic of what this is. So an attacker essentially inserts this lookup in a header field that likely is to be logged, that could be logged, and they hit that vulnerable server. And then secondly, that string is then passed into Log4j. So it then logs that string. It then queries the malicious server. So as I mentioned, that JNDI then goes out and queries another server to come back. Well, it queries, in this case, a malicious server because the attacker has inserted that different lookup path into the JNDI. And then that LDAP server then will respond with the militia Java code. And then Java downloads that and executes it automatically with no certification, no verification, et cetera. It just automatically